So when I was doing my GCSE exams for English, admittedly I was already fairly good at English purely because I was reading from a young age, so that did give me an advantage. But even if you haven't been reading from a young age, it's never too late, especially if you're watching this video from year 9 or 10 or even in year 11. Just start reading wherever you can, like substitute your Netflix out for a book, whatever suits your fancy. Or start reading newspaper articles, magazine articles, maybe download a news app like BBC News and read an article on there every morning, or whatever tabloid or broadsheet newspaper you like The Guardian or the Daily Mail. Just get reading wherever you can. That will have a direct correlation or impact on the quality of your writing in English. There's been studies on it. Reading does really impact your writing skills and your academia in general. So that's the first tip. Start reading as much as you can. Second tip is to get your structures in order, and this is imperative, especially for English language, also for English literature as well though. You need to make sure that for each question you know the structure and you memorize the structure so that when you get into the exam you have a clear structure that will help you to plan out your answers and get the most marks. My exam board is AQA, so the structures may differ between exam boards, but obviously the principle of having a structure remains the same. So for me, off the top of my head, I can remember that English language paper 1 question 2, the structure was petal, so point, evidence, technique, analysis, link, and it was around 1 or 2 paragraphs I would have to write, and it'd take me around 8 to 10 minutes to write that question. So you have to have a structure for each of your questions, and then also have an idea in mind of how much time you need to spend on each question, and the amount of marks for each of the questions will give you an indicative of how much time you should spend on them. For example, question 4 has a lot more marks than question 2 in AQA, therefore you would spend a lot more time on question 4, and you need to have a clear idea of how much time that would be. So normally your teachers would go through this with you in class. If so, that's great, they've done the work for you. All you need to do is write it down like on a grid if you can of each question, and then the structural acronym that you would use, say like PETAL or PEAL or whatever, and then the amount of time you will spend on it. And then what you can do is take that grid and then convert them into flashcards and then do those flashcards every day. That's what I did. I made a Quizlet set of each of the questions in English language, and then I was doing those flashcards every day, so then it just became second nature to me. If your teacher does not do that with you, that's fine. There are plenty of resources online that will give you structures as well. For example, I believe Mr. Bruff, he was like an amazing guiding light during English GCSE time for me. He, I believe, has lots of videos on each of the questions within English language and English literature, and I believe he has structures for each of them as well. I'm sure if you looked online further you'd be able to find structures from other resources as well. The third thing is, once you have the structures and the timings in mind, you need to devise a strategy for what order you're going to be answering the questions in, because English language and literature, you're writing very long essays, multiple of them, and you have a limited amount of time to do it in. So chances are, if you're like me where you waffle a lot, you'll probably run out of time, or it is likely that you'll run out of time. So you need to make sure as an insurance that you are prioritising the questions that have the most marks and doing them first, and then leaving the questions that have lesser marks towards the end, so that if you ran out of time for those questions, then you'd only be missing out on a few marks, as opposed to, let's say you spent all of your time on questions 1, 2, 3 and 4. Question 5, which your honour has an enormous amount of marks, you missed that one completely. That's literally half the paper gone. So you'd want to make sure you have an idea in mind of what order you're going to be answering the questions, and normally it'd be back to front. That's what most people do. I had a strange kind of structure. What I was doing for paper 2, I think it was question 4, then 2, then 1, then 5, then 3. I left 3 out because I think that was the structure question, like how does a writer use structural techniques to blah 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 blah. I wasn't very good at that question. I knew I would normally only be getting like a few marks on it even if I spent like a good 10 minutes on it, but I was really good at the other questions. I'd always get full marks on the other questions if I spent a good amount of time on them, so I prioritised those ones and left that one to the end and wrote like a sentence in it, which would get me like 1 or 2 marks, which I was happy with. So make sure you have an idea in mind of what order you're going to be answering the questions in to maximise the amount of marks you get within the time. Third thing is, and this is so important, you need to practice questions as much as you can. Practice them every day. Just go on like physics and maths tutor and search up your exam board for English language or literature, and then just answer the questions. You don't have to do an entire past paper every day. You can just do, especially in the beginning, you can just do like 1 question per day, like a question 2 or a question 4, and then what you need to do is you need to then go and hand it in to your teacher. people think like I have person who I tutor, and then I was telling her to like, oh, when you do your English language questions, hand it into your teacher and she can mark it for you, and then she can give it back to you, and then you can use your feedback to build on it. And then she was saying, oh, but I don't want to bother her because she's always busy. But that teacher is getting paid to teach you. And a lot of the time, like, people think that their teachers, they're bothering them and stuff, but the teachers are likely more than happy to help you. My teacher was always more than happy to mark my work and give me feedback. She was actually pleased that I was taking my learning into my own hands and I was using my initiative and I was getting her to mark my work for me, because obviously your teachers, they mark stuff, they know what they're doing, and marking English work especially is subjective. So you want to get someone who has more knowledge on the subject to mark your work so that you can build on it, so that they can teach you. This may sound strange as well, but there got to a point where I was writing questions for myself as well, because I was doing this for such a long time where I was doing past paper questions for English that eventually I ran out of past paper questions to do. So I was writing questions for myself. Like, I was sitting down and spontaneously writing like a story and then analysing that story. It doesn't actually take that long. Like, you can literally sit down and waffle down a story for like a couple of minutes, and then when you go back to analyse it, you'll find that there are some really interesting analyses that you can pick out from it. At least once you train yourself to see those really deep connotations and deeper meanings within your work, it'll be easier to pick out. For example, when I tutor people for English, and then I sit there going through a question with them and I come up with these really interesting analyses on the spot, they always tell me, like, how do you come up with these things so fast? It's purely because I was practicing it for so long. I was doing a question for English regularly, like almost every day. I think, towards the beginning especially. That trained me over time to see these analyses much faster, and that is essential, especially when you go into the exam. You want to be able to pick up these analyses really quickly so that you don't waste time. Next thing, this is mainly for English literature, you need to familiarise yourself with the themes and context of your text. So for example, with me, one of my texts that I was studying in English literature was Romeo and Juliet. Obviously that was around the Shakespearean time, and it was written in Shakespearean time because it was written by Shakespeare. Familiarised myself with the context of that text, the hierarchy, the social structure around Shakespearean time, patriarchal society, the roles of women, the reigning monarchs. Those things will all influence the way in which Shakespeare writes in his text, and that is something that is really imperative to consider when you're writing in your actual response in the exam, because then you're able to talk about, oh, this links to, you know, the role of women at the time around Shakespeare's time, blah 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 blah. Juliet emulates the role of women, and how her father and Paris emulate the patriarchal structure. I'm just waffling here. You get the point. When you are able to link the context, that is going to earn you so many extra marks, because the examiner can clearly see that you know what you're talking about, and you know the text inside out, you know the context, and you know the writer's intentions, and you have a clear, concise idea of what they're intending to say because of the context. Then you'd also want to look at themes. So themes within your text, for example, in Romeo and Juliet, may be like things like power and conflict, role of women, patriarchy, marriage, love, loss, religion, fate, things like that. And then when you're able to use themes, you're able to fit your analyses within these themes and come up with even deeper analyses. And this brings me on to my final point, which can really help you with understanding themes and context within literature, is reading on scholarly articles about your text. So for example, for me, I had Romeo and Juliet and A Christmas Carol. Reading articles written by people who are experts in the field, like professors of literature, can do wonders for you. My teacher actually gave me a booklet that had several like essays and articles written by literary professors, I believe, about Romeo and Juliet. I think it was Romeo and Juliet. Yeah. And then they had some really interesting perspectives about things I've never even thought about within the play. And then I was able to then take those ideas and then embellish on them and then magpie them and then put them into my own work in the actual exam. And those kind of things, they just blow the examiners away, having these really abstract concepts and abstract ideas. And obviously reading up from the opinion of an expert, a literature professor, they know what they're talking about. They've been studying this extensively. So having that under your belt and being able to pull that out in the exam and obviously not copy the idea word for word, but being able to use the idea and then shape it into your own kind of idea and then link it to the question and put it into your work, that's going to do so much for you. That's going to really change the game for you in terms of how you answer questions within literature. And yeah, I'm not just saying this, like, this isn't just pure waffle. Like, this actually worked for me. Obviously, I managed to get a grade 9 in my final literature exam in my GCSEs, and during the mocks, when I got the mocks back, I was getting full marks or almost full marks in my literature exam questions in the GCSE mocks. So this actually does work. I'm not saying this to flex, like, I'm just saying this to show you that This isn't just waffle, like this is actually proven to work based on my experience. And then in terms of English language, like if you followed my other videos, and you know I got an 8 in the final exam because I ran out of time and I didn't finish my question 5, but I did get 9s in the mocks, so it does work as well. And yeah, I don't think I have anything left to say other than good luck with your exams, you got this, and yeah, bye guys.